Hello. We know from some of the stories I've brought you that getting a divorce back in these days is about as easy as getting a Labrador retriever out of water on a hot day, or any day. But sometimes a situation comes to pass that makes getting a divorce as speedy as the fastest highway in Texas. But these situations can be a little odd, or maybe just getting out of getting married. Indianapolis, 1911. The state Supreme Court granted the wife of a doctor in Oakland City with divorce because her husband gave his wife extreme mental torture. Sounds horrific, right? Dr. Stewart would leave home for long periods of time. Well, then his wife decided that this was a two-way street. She too would go away for long periods of time. What's good for the goose is good for the gander and all that. Well, as you can imagine, Dr. Stewart did not like this. While his wife was gone during one particular adventure, or whatever it was she was doing, he would amuse himself by going to the family's hen house and drawing pictures and leaving messages for his wife on the eggs for her and their children to find. The wife sued, citing cruel and inhumane treatment and also the egg messages. The court granted her divorce request and awarded her $7,866 in alimony and attorney's fees. Dr. Stewart would try to appeal, but the court would come back and say, quote, "In this case, after nearly 40 years of wedded life, after appellee had borne to her husband 6 children, there is flaunted in the face of a virtuous wife in the presence of her children a charge calculated to cause more exquisite mental torture than any other which fiendish ingenuity might devise. Under the circumstances here, this is cruel and inhuman treatment within the meaning of our statute." End quote. What drawings and messages did he leave her? I don't know, and I'm actually fine with that for once. Indianapolis again, 1923. Superior Court Judge T.J. Mall is looking into the so-called divorce problem. What does he think? Quote, "Something is loose in society. Something is rotten in Denmark. The economic emancipation of women has resulted in women adopting the attitude that they should have the same social privileges as man. But they still insist on the privilege of looking to man for protection and support. They would eat their cake and have it. The morality of women has undoubtedly sunk in the last 10 years far below its previous level. There are 2 things to consider which are fundamental to the whole problem. Number 1, the innate selfishness of the individual. Number 2, the standard or morals of the individual. If both parties to a marriage are altruistic, but not servile, and are of high moral standard, they will not see the divorce court. Another thing is too much money. Society can't stand prosperity. It runs wild. It goes over the bank. It steps on it. But eventually, it may be generations, women will assert themselves to the limit. They will discover the impracticability of their position. Then they will return to normalcy. The courts in recent years have gradually lopped off the sharp edges of the cruel and inhuman treatment ground for divorce, until now we have what is virtually returned to the old ground of incompatibility of temperament. Whether this will be dealt with by legislation or the problem will await the gradual reversion to the former respect for marriage vows remains to be seen." End quote. Chicago, 1910. Irene has 2 husbands. Something normally most would keep secret, but not Irene, who would like to get a legal separation from both of her husbands at the same time. Apparently, she had eloped from a boarding school in Indiana back in the day, fled to a Mr. Neal, who she married. She was under the impression that at some point they had divorced. But presently, she thinks that they may still be married. Ma'am, why don't you know? Anyway, she would like to get annulled from that old marriage. And then from her present husband. She's charging him with cruelty and wants a divorce from him too. Clean slate. Detroit, 1889. A party of people had gathered together to witness the wedding of a Miss Remington to a Mr. Jones, everyone at the home of Miss Remington's family. And they waited. And they waited. And they waited for the groom, who was a no-show Of course, people are talking as they wait, believing Mr. Jones had played Miss Remington. She overheard, and she fainted. Everyone was told they could go home now, no party or wedding tonight. Did they get some cake anyway? Around that same time, Mr. Jones had called at the residence of a Methodist preacher, along with a girl named Agnes. Agnes? Who's that? Yeah, Agnes, not Miss Remington. Anywho, Mr. Jones and Agnes left on a train and headed south right afterward. Papa Remington plans to avenge his daughter. Lawfully, I'm sure. 1922. We usually say that marriages don't last, but what about divorces? One couple got divorced because they were incompatible in temperament. The judge agreed wholeheartedly and allowed for the divorce. Probably one reason why it was so easily granted was because the couple did not have children. They had been together for 15 years, and now they went their separate ways. Thanksgiving Day came. You know, holidays can make some sentimental, reminisce. The husband had moved to the big city and on Thanksgiving Day had his dinner in a hotel where there was the usual cranberry sauce. He thought the hotel sauce was terrible. Sad that it was so bad, but the husband began to think about old times. The cranberry sauce his wife had made, her sweet face sitting across the table from him on their first Thanksgiving together. He sent her a telegram, and they reconciled and will have cranberry sauce at Christmas. 1944. This one is about the famous actress Joan Fontaine, best known probably for the movie Rebecca, but she was in many movies. She was born in Tokyo, Japan as Joan de Havilland, and her sister is Olivia de Havilland, also a very famous actress. Anyway, Joan, when she was 21, married a Brian Ahern. The two were both of very like temperaments. Reserved, quiet, intellectual, except for one problem. Her husband loved to go to their ranch in the desert, being quite the outdoorsman, and wanted Joan to be there with him, of course. But Joan was allergic to dust, massively. Here is a beautiful woman who relies on her face and her acting ability in the movies. And it's not exactly a good thing if she gets puffed up and has leaky eyes all the time. But I guess the wife does what the husband wants, and she would suffer these allergy attacks for it. Finally, she could not handle it anymore. She wanted a divorce based on extreme cruelty because she was made to live at the dusty ranch. The court agreed. Lawrenceburg, Indiana, 1905. We have got a 65-year-old man and a 60-year-old woman who have been hitched for 37 years and have lived together that entire time. Had 3 meals a day together and had 6 children. Well, that's lovely, TMN. Why are they in your story today? Oh, because they have not spoken for 21 years. Say hello to Uncle Ham and Aunt Julia. Anyone who thought that the 21-year rift would be fixed? No. Aunt Julia got her divorce and $2,000 alimony and said adios to her home of 37 years. Supposedly, they had a quarrel in 1884, and that was the end of the chit-chatting. Let's back up the dump truck for a minute. Some 40 years ago, everyone in the area knew that Ham liked him some Julia. He was aiming to be a farmer then and considered a good catch. And Julia deemed to be the prettiest girl in the county. Ham courted her and they got married May 27, 1868. All seemed well and perfect. Ham was a hard worker and a good farmer, increasing his acreage over the years to having 110 of what was said to be the best land in the township. Fine house, the most head of stock, good farm equipment, and the prettiest wife. And for 15 years, things were fine. In 1884, their last child, Ella, would be born, and that was all of the kids, because that was the end of the happiness. Not because of Ella, but just the timing of it all, because an incident would occur that ruffled Julia's feathers some. A peddler came to town with his cart, saw Ham's flock of geese, and told Ham They were the finest in all the state. Peddler wanted them, and he and Ham negotiated on a price. Things were settled, more money in the bank for the family. Until Julia came out of the farmhouse and asked just what in tarnation was the peddler wanting with her geese. Uh-oh. Quote, he's buying him. It's all right, mother. He's paying all they're worth. End quote. Quote, now don't you do no such thing, Ham grubs. I've been a-saving those geese for their down. I'm a-going to make feather beds out of it. End quote. Quote, now see here, Jewel, this man is paying a good stiff sum for these here geese, and we can raise more of them. Besides, I never slept under a feather bed, and I never will. End quote. Quote, well, Ham grubs, I have, and I'm a-going to do it again. I don't care what you do. End quote. More money in the bank or having the comfort of feather-down beds? Peddler made off with the geese, and Ham came back into the house. More words were said. Then Julia declared, quote, I'll never speak to you again, end quote. Quote, all right, do as you like, end quote. Normally the never speak to you again lasts for, what, a day or two? But it's the kids always caught up in the parental storm. All the fighting brought the kids anxious tears. Realizing this wasn't going to do, Julia did say one last thing to him. Quote, don't worry about them, Ham grubs. I'll stay here in the same house with you until every one of them is grown up, and then we can see what we'll do. But don't you speak to me, end quote. Quote, all right, I won't, end quote. Everyone in the neighborhood heard about this verbal standoff, but like most of us would, thought that it'll blow over with time. But no. And as they grew older and began to form their own opinions, the children began to take sides, which just didn't help the situation at all. Ham would continue working hard and adding to his wealth, finally owning the farm free and clear and with $15,000 in the bank. Julia was making the children's clothes, keeping them fed, making sure they went to school, keeping house, keeping everything and everyone clean, making butter and cheese. As the years passed, they would still not speak until finally the youngest, Ella, was left. Unfortunately, she became a kind of mediator between her parents. She tried to get them to forget all that had happened, but no. For 2 years, she was around relaying messages, I guess, until finally she turned 21 and decided it was time to leave. And with last child out, Ham and Julia decided it was time to end the marriage. Julia was going to the home of one of her sons in Illinois, one of her children who had sided with her. Ella told her pa this, but he wasn't having it. He said Julia couldn't leave. Who would take her place? In other words, who was going to do all of the work she had been doing over the years? Well, Julia was like, I'm not going to say what she thought about that, but needless to say, she sued for divorce for cruel and inhumane treatment that he had cursed at her in front of their children and had said other things to her that no husband should say to his wife. Judge George Downey heard the case, looked into it, and decided, yeah, there was no chance in hell this couple would reconcile. Julia went to her son's home out of state. Ham remained at the farm, determined to end his days alone. Wow. 1899. This article in the Monroe City Democrat gives me some short summaries on what they deem to be odd divorce cases. Thank you, newspaper. A Connecticut man got a divorce on the ground that, quote, the defendant would not get up in the morning, nor call this plaintiff, nor do anything she was told, end quote. A decree was granted in a Massachusetts court because, quote, the defendant keeps this plaintiff awake most of the night, quarreling, end quote. A Wisconsin man got a divorce because his wife kept a servant girl, quote, who spit on the frying pan to see if it was hot enough, end quote. A Virginia woman was set free because, quote, the defendant does not come until 1 a.m. and then keeps this plaintiff awake talking, end quote. A Tennessee court liberated a wife because, quote, the defendant does not wash himself, thereby causing the plaintiff great mental anguish, end quote. In Minnesota, a decree was given to a wife because, quote, the defendant never cuts his toenails and being restless in his sleep scratches this plaintiff severely, end quote. Okay, all fair. Another one from Monroe City Democrat, but in 1908. published from the Winfield, Kansas Tribune. Quote, "The strangest complaint in the divorce courts noted for some time is that of a woman who wants to leave her husband because he won't dye his red hair to match the new furniture. The alimony should be large and gratefully paid by the husband of such a wife. Some men have no artistic tendencies." End quote. I'm sensing some sarcasm there, but I will take it. St. Louis, 1871. Back in 1849, one Britton Hill, a lawyer in St. Louis, and his wife were divorced. In 1854, the ex-wife was then married to a Mr. Barclay. I guess with the divorce to Hill, she was given some property by the legislature, which is now in 1871, worth almost $1 million. In 1857, Mr. Hill, the first husband, married again. His new wife during the war, I'm assuming the Civil War, had gone to Europe and unfortunately became involved in some hanky-panky, to which Mr. Hill sued for divorce. Apparently, and this is weird, but it was reported that she had drowned. But that wasn't true. Then she had become a part of the household of King Victor Emmanuel, but then some months later, she did die. The suit for divorce was thrown out because, well, she's dead. You still with me? So Hill's first wife that he divorced at the approval of the legislature, she's now Mrs. Barclay because she married again. Well, she brought suit to someone named Samuel Simmons to get a piece of land per the divorce agreement. Simmons refused, saying that her divorce to her first husband, Britton Hill, had been illegally done by the legislature, and therefore she could not get a clear title to the land she was supposed to get from that Hill divorce. It went to the Supreme Court, who said the legislature had indeed been wrong. To get things back to rights, Britton Hill applied for a divorce from his first wife, who he has not lived with for 20 years, and who has been married to another man for 16 years. Divorce granted, all children under both marriages back to being legitimate, and everyone's happy. Oh my God, my head hurts. 1904, a man named Howard in Kansas City was too fond and in love with his wife and let her do whatever she wanted to do. Well, she wants a divorce. Quote, "My husband has no backbone. Whenever I asked for anything, I always got it without question. There is no satisfaction in that kind of humdrum existence for me." End quote. Wait, what? 1909. And finally, we have a few that are just a bit off the rails because they follow the letter of the law. First in this group is a case out of New York that was contained in the 92nd volume of the New York Supreme Court Reports, People versus Faber. Mr. Faber was divorced from his wife at her request. Great. He married her again and was indicted and convicted for bigamy. What? Because the law says, quote, "A person against whom a decree of divorce has been granted by the courts of the state, who, during the lifetime of the plaintiff, marries again within the state, is guilty of bigamy. He is a person having a husband or wife living." End quote. He was actually sent to Sing Sing prison for a 5-year sentence. So yes, even though he had married his ex-wife again, marriage is a marriage, he was considered a bigamist regardless of the fact that it was the same woman. Another similar case out of Brooklyn was Moore versus Moore, where the divorced parties had married each other again. Chief Justice Nelson, quote, "As this wife knew of the provision forbidding her husband to remarry during her lifetime, and as the decree in which that provision was contained had been obtained upon her motion, the second marriage of these previously divorced parties was illegal and void." End quote. Supreme Court of Illinois, with regards to these lawful shenanigans in New York, would say for their case Dunham versus Dunham, quote, "We cannot regard as sound a doctrine leading to such results. We are unable to see the force of the reasoning which is used to support judicial conclusions that one of the married pair may in one jurisdiction, by virtue of its laws and in honest compliance with them, obtain a valid decree of divorce, which as to the one obtaining it is valid and binding in every state in the Union, leaving such a one single and free to remarry in any state, while the matrimonial bonds are still unsevered as to the other party, making him a bigamist should he remarry. It would seem to be as logical to say that one of the Siamese twins might have been severed from the other without that other being severed from the one." End quote. Mull on that for a bit. That New York law says that the home of the husband is that of the wife, and wherever and whenever he sees fit to move house, the wife must follow. Excuse me? Apparently there are exceptions to that rule. Bellow Falls, Vermont, 1885. A Mr. Albee had married the village dressmaker and went to live with his parents on the family farm. Daughter-in-law and mother-in-law had issues. They would take pains to not speak to each other if at all possible. At some point, Mrs. Albee, the dressmaker, would have to return to town to look after her business. Mr. Albee drove her to the station and they never lived with each other again. He would go visit, she would beg him to make a home of their own, and wherever it was, she would be there. I guess she didn't want to live on the farm with ma-in-law. After their physical separation, Mr. Albee would go to Chicago and would claim desertion. I guess it was easier to go out of state to get the divorce, and well, Reno, the divorce capital, was too far away. He obtained a divorce decree, but the appellate and Supreme Courts overruled it. The appellate court would use a Vermont case as a foundation. Quote, "Any man who has proper tenderness and affection for his wife would certainly not require her to reside near his relatives if her peace of mind was thereby seriously disturbed." Everyone at all experienced in such matters knows that it is not uncommon for the female relatives of the husband to create, either intentionally or accidentally, disquietude in the mind of the wife, and thereby to destroy her comfort and health. This is the wisdom of the Supreme Court of the appellate's own state, and if he had heeded its own suggestions, he would not be a stranger in a strange land. Chicago, he's talking about you, seeking a divorce from a loving wife whose only fault seems with his mother. End quote. What came of that? I don't know. I hope they worked it out. I don't make light of divorce at all, but sometimes I can't help but be fascinated with some of these old stories about marriages, bigamy, divorces, what the courts thought, how they handled them. Sometimes just bizarre. Hope you enjoyed it. See you.